G'day, guys, and welcome to the Centre Bounce, where we have a very special episode today. We are joined by someone who I'm sure you all recognize, and if you don't, you're probably living under a rock. It is one of the big names and the big faces in the Supercoach community. It is, of course, JD. He's got his own channel on YouTube and is also one of the major pillars over there at the Fantasy Take TV. Thank you so much for coming on, JD.
Thanks for having me, Joe. How you going on this fine evening?
Yeah, doing really well, especially because we're going to be talking about, I'm in the gear. We're talking about our boys, the Bombers. For those who don't know, you are an Essendon supporter, just like myself. Unfortunately, we haven't had too much to celebrate in recent times, but
No.
we've seen a lot of changes though. So hopefully we can be on the up.
Yeah, I don't have the full kit, but I can actually show you a bit of Essendon history, which actually shows the last time I was successful. So just bear with me 1 second.
Yes, please. It was a while ago. So, it's close by. It's close by.
This here, now I can't hear you because I've got the headphones off. This is a back-to-back premiership poster for 2000, 2001. Of course, we didn't win the 2001, 2000 back-to-back. So this is a rare print that only, I believe, 2 of these exist. And I happen to be in possession of one of them. So yeah, that's my bit of Essendon memorabilia for the podcast. And yeah, last time we were good. Back then, the best team of the modern era, the 2000 Dons.
Yeah. Oh my God. I can't believe memorabilia exists that isn't even accurate. Like it's almost fake. It's fake memorabilia. I have never seen that before. But of course, it's the Bombers. What can you expect from anything related to the Bombers? We always are outside of the box, outside of the mold, as is our curse. Obviously, that is record breaking, but we're looking to move past that. All right, looking to move past that because we've had some change over the off season. I think none of us really had any sort of idea what sort of expectations to have for 2023. I know I basically had no expectations going into 2023.
And I think you want to be optimistic, especially when you're going into a new coach as well. And we've seen, with other clubs, Collingwood, obviously a great example from the last couple of years, that a new coach can make a really big difference for a side that didn't necessarily look like it was right at the top end. And maybe that was the somewhat disappointing part of last year, which is you didn't see as big of a spike as what we could have seen. But I'm sure we're going to go over some of the flaws of the Essendon side. And I think Scott did do a decent job in addressing some of those, but yeah, let's carry on.
Yeah, no, I agree. I definitely was happy that it was Scott that got the job. Just off the riff, I was happy. I was a pro Scott person. Like, were you a pro Scott?
I over some of the other names, like the Leon Cameron got thrown around at some point, and I committed to this. If Leon Cameron was appointed our head coach, I would have found another club. And I'm not kidding. I would have abandoned ship. No, I was when it came down to some of the candidates we had, I think Scott seemed to be the best of what was there. So I definitely wasn't anti-Scott, but I do think you look at, the coaches or the head coaches that have already had a long tenure, then move to another club. They don't exactly have a great track record of winning premierships, but of course it's not like there's a giant pool of these either. And there's always different circumstances they're going into. And of course, like, it's interesting with him as well. Like, you've got the identical twin that's still coaching at the top level. So you'd imagine that, like, maybe he's someone that could break some mold given the pedigree and the family and the history of what as a Brisbane premiership player as well.
Plus, where he came from, AFL headquarters, where he basically got to see how every single club did their business. He saw basically how much everyone was paid. I thought that certainly was really helpful, at least in the short term, for him to take and bring across from other teams, as well as his brother, some ways to improve our team. And I thought we did see an improvement this year. I know we finished 11th. I know it was 11 wins and 12 losses with a very crap percentage, but a lot of that was off the back. I personally think that we were sort of found out in that we didn't have the fitness. We also had a lot of injuries in the back end of the season. And so we really just collapsed and just fell over the line, struggling to beat North, struggling to beat West Coast, and then getting thumped by 2 very powerful teams in the Giants and the Pies. I still look at it with a glass half full. I sort of like the improvements that we saw, especially in the first half of the season.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you touched on a couple of things there. I worry any time like the biggest advantage a coach has is like AFL house intel. To me, that doesn't feel like what makes a premiership winning coach. It's game plans and styles and attitudes and cultures that they bring. But the one thing I will credit Scott with is Essendon wasn't just fractured when it came to what we see of the coaching staff, but also when it came to what was going on in head office, or at least that seemed to be the case in the outside, especially with some of the dynamics going on between the board, some of the Rotary groups, all that type of stuff. And I think one of the things, to Scott's credit, is that it seems like a lot of that has been settled over the last 12 months when it comes to how the club is run, the people that have been put into the positions to run it now. And that's been done without much fuss. I think a lot of that has been reined back in, and that is the advantage of having someone from the background that you've talked about, both being a former coach, but also from AFL House, that I think, has been able to stand up to them in ways that maybe other coaches wouldn't have necessarily felt as comfortable with. And that's the dual side of being a big club, right? You have all these positives when it comes to fan base and history and fundraising, all that type of stuff, but you also get these external pressures, and I think he's been able to deal with those pretty well. So yeah, to bring it back to on-field performance, though, I think one of the things that Essendon fans have criticised the team for most over the last couple of years, especially under Rutten, but even prior to that, is just around consistency. Some weeks looking like we could be, right into the thick of finals, and then others looking like we should be putting our hand up for the number one draft pick, right? We're like the day and night between our performances were huge. And one of the things I guess you could credit Scott with was a more consistent performance across last year, which reflects in our points for differential, points against differential, which have improved across last year, which is obviously a positive sign. But the worrying part was, I guess, that drop off in the last month or two. I was at that GWS game. Yep, I'd had enough by halftime. It was pretty bad. So, when you see stuff like that, it's like, yeah, we did pretty well for most of the year, but we're falling over and stumbling when teams like GWS are actually hitting their straps, when Collingwood were hitting the straps, and these are two of and Carlton as well. And these are the three teams that went deep and were exciting in the finals, and we went the opposite direction. And so that is, quite distressing as a fan. It's like, yeah, I saw some improvements, but like, that's not enough. Some isn't enough. We've had some in bits and pieces of our game for a long time. So yeah, I think this year, I know Scott signed quite a long deal, didn't he? Wasn't it like 4 or 5 years? Like, it was an extended period of time.
Yeah,
So he could
5 years. Yeah.
yeah. And so it feels weird to say the second year is make or break. And I don't mean make or break in terms of, whether he's still head coach at the end of the year and all that type of stuff. I just mean in terms of how optimistic Essendon fans can get about, do we see a reasonable performance improvement from here? Are we going from 11 to 13, 14, actually knocking on that top 8? Or are we going to be staying around the same mark? I think what's hard for us to gauge on as well is, if he's there for 5 years, he's probably got some type of 5-year plan. Where does he see the performance improving to in this year? Because if he sees 11 wins as a large outperformance last year, and 11 wins is actually the benchmark for this year, and we go 11 wins again, I think you could have this dynamic where a lot of fans are really disappointed, but it's actually in line with where they're tracking. So yeah, I don't know how you feel about all this stuff and where you sit, but there was,
For me,
it was very mixed bag for me last year.
It absolutely was a mixed bag, but I want to look at, I know it sucks coming into the off season having capitulated in the way that we did, but at the same time, we've sort of seen in recent times that the opposite also really sucks and can be pretty brutal come the next year round. So, for example, we had a really good run and we managed to make the finals. We play against the Bulldogs. We're doing really well. The rain comes and we lose in the elimination final down in Tasmania. And Cody Waitman kicks a bunch of goals on us, all from free kicks. We hate him to bits. But we're overall optimistic. We hear the messaging from them that they're burning, that they can't wait to hit the preseason. But then they sort of drink their own bathwater and they get absolutely rolled, and it's an absolute tragic way for Truck Rutten to basically be sacked. So we've sort of seen that even if you end the season on a high, it's not necessarily going to translate into a really positive improvement in the following year. For me, I don't think Brad Scott is necessarily happy with an 11th position finish. I think he certainly wanted to do more. I think he certainly wanted to play finals. And that's probably why he made some of the list decisions during the season to play players who he initially said, we're not going to play players unless they're 100% fit and ready to go. But somewhere along the line, that started to change. He wanted to play finals. He wanted to make top 8. He brought back Stringer. He brought back Shield. He brought Draper. A bunch of these players who weren't ready to go because he wants to win. And I sort of, whilst obviously looking at it in hindsight, it wasn't the right decision. But I think that it's more so about the process and the mentality. We're not looking to take it slow. We're trying to improve and make finals and be a consistent finals team. So in that respect, I'm sort of looking at this team and Brad Scott's approach with the glass half full, because we're not just simply sitting here on our laurels for 5 years because that's the length of his contract. I think he wants us to get better sooner. And I sort of love that he's implementing tactics. We finally have a game plan, a coach who has a game plan, willing to execute it. And I think we saw it best. I know you might think otherwise, but I saw clear as day that there was a plan against Melbourne. There was a plan against Richmond. And if there was no plan in those 2 games, we lose.
Yeah, so I would agree that there's a plan, but every coach has a plan. I think it just comes down to how good the plan is and how well the players can execute it. And with Rutten, we saw that the execution wasn't there, and maybe the plan itself wasn't that good either. With Scott, I think, we talked about consistency and that buy-in, and I think we saw a little bit more of that this year, but I'm just not sure about the game plan itself. It was on that slower, more possession-style game plan that doesn't really work in the modern day when we see what the best teams are doing, especially someone like a Collingwood. Once again, when Carlton turned it around, they went from a slower game style, like what we were playing, to a more faster, aggressive one, and that really opened things up for them. And this actually, for me, does come down a little bit into what changes were made in the offseason, because I think they partly explained by what game plan we're playing and what is actually successful in them at the moment. Because where Essendon struggled really was with a lot of that transition out of defence and connection through the centre of the ground. And then, of course, in the forward line, we had some weaknesses as well. We also then had positional weaknesses where, in the key tall stock, we got exposed a few times by, bigger players like Hawkins, where Zerk Thatcher, who I think is a great defender and should do really well for Port, as long as he's not being asked to play on the number 1 defender each week. But, these guys are really getting opened up, because between him and Laverty, neither of them are real true number 1 key position defender. So Mackay coming in and being able to fill in that role should open things up for Essendon, as well as hopefully, Zach Reid coming on hopefully this year as well. Potentially even Cox in defence as well should help things up. But you look at players like Dersma, and I think that's one that does do two-way running really well and connect through the ground into the forward 50 well, which we lack that connection a lot of the time. And small forwards were also an obvious weakness last year, with Waller kind of on his last legs before retirement. And Davey obviously debuted, but the Davey that was fit and available to play was more of a midfielder in Alwyn than he is a small forward. And so we just really struggled in that part of the ground as well. And Gresham comes in as someone that can play that small forward role, which is really nice. And then, of course, Goldie's been picked up as well, which is a nice one. Obviously some experience for Draper and Brian. I think Brian's looks like he'll be good, but not quite there. And Draper, we know, has been struggling with groin injuries. So I can see the need for a backup there. And Goldie's great player. He grew up as an Essendon fan, I believe, as well. So it's kind of like a nice way for him to end his career, even though he doesn't get the joy of being a one club player all the way through. I feel like I'm taking your bit a little bit by talking through all this stuff, but I'll just quickly say on the 2 that left. So, Zerk Thatcher, I'm a huge fan of his. I just think that he should have been playing second key rather than primary. And so if he gets that role at Port, I think he could have a really good year for them. I really like a lot of the stuff that he does. Yeah. But I think what we were asking him to do versus where he's at in his career just wasn't really fair on sometimes, and he probably copped unnecessary hate for that. But with Mackay coming in, I can see why he'd want to leave for other opportunities, especially if we're trying to develop Reid at the same time.
Yeah, exactly.
And then D. Ambrosio, also a massive fan of him. I've really liked everything he's done in red and black, and it was unfortunate he didn't get more opportunities last year. So to see him be picked up at the Hawks, it sounds like he's going to play a wing role, maybe halfback, but yeah, probably wing there. And I'm looking forward to see what they do with him. And by the way, the Hawks is a team that, obviously as an SM fan, we've got to hate them a bit, But
Oh, of course.
and Sammy Mitchell with the whole jab stuff, but I admire the hell out of them. And I think that's probably one of the most frustrating things. Pies is on the same realm as well, where we've been down and down for a long time. Pies and Hawks have been up, and you expect them to join us in the mud at some point, but they've just both rebounded. Sammy Mitchell looks like he's going to be the best coach of the AFL, which is a shame because when we were looking at Rutten, I wanted us to try and get him then, but we never really had a proper look, at least from what I've heard and read.
Because
but anyway, so D'Ambrosio I'm excited for. Let's not talk about them. Let's talk about our ins and outs. Do you want to go through some of the outs and retirements then? Although I feel like, once again, I'm sorry, I've kind of walked all over your speaking notes.
No. We are fellow Dons here today. We are both presenting the Essendon Football Club. It's not just for me. Tipper obviously retired for a second time. But we got to say, that was one of the best moments in the season when he came out against the Hawks. Talking about the Hawks, he came out in round one, was the sub. We all cheered him on like crazy. He kicked the goal. That was wonderful. And Andrew Phillips, career best season for him, but he wanted to move down to Tasmania with his family. Best of luck to him. It just made sense on so many levels for us to pick up an experienced ruckman like Todd Goldstein. I was a bit surprised that he did choose to come to us. I would have thought he'd go somewhere like a Collingwood, for example, somewhere that he could actually challenge for a flag in the latter stage of his career. But, I think it's a good thing for us that he's come in because he has that, I suppose, that professionalism. I think Gresham is a definite upgrade on Snelling, who was delisted. Voss, I know a lot of us Essendon supporters were, I guess it was sort of a mixed bag. I think most people were sort of disappointed that Voss couldn't get a crack in. But if you look at it objectively, with all of the injuries that we had in our forward line, if he couldn't break into that, then it's just clear as day that Scott doesn't rate him. Lord really never was close to it. McBride wasn't really close to it. Montgomery, I thought he was pretty quick to be dropped. Mm-hmm. But when you look at all the other key defenders that we've got at the Bombers, it's like he's going to have to rely on so many injuries to get in to the point where there's no point having him. Plus, he wasn't a real big key position size player. He relied on his athleticism. Mankara, I was really cut about. He was so exciting. He could do some incredible things. And Jimmy Stewart, unfortunately, just couldn't break his way back into the side. And I like it that we're making some tough list calls in terms of trying to, you've been here at the club. Thank you for your services. We got to turn the list over. We're going to have to try and get better quicker. So I think overall the club certainly improved itself. And talking about your game plan, I think Brad Scott, when he came in, didn't really have a game plan and was happy to look at the list and see what was the best way to build it. What are we missing? Because it was very different to the Truck Rutten approach, who tried to simply bring across the Richmond game style and apply it to us when we did not have the list or the personnel to actually implement that strategy. I'm pretty sure I heard in an interview that Brad Scott really came in with an open mind, have a look at the list and see what the best way it is to build it. He's picked up, I think, on a lot of those flaws that we had in our game style, in our players, in our list, and they've gone in and they've targeted these players who I think all will be best 23 and will all feature in our list. I think there's a lot of optimism around these changes. We're not going to be caught out one-on-one. Maybe Ridley can play a bit more intercepting. I know we've had a bit of discussions about Jordan Ridley in a Supercoach sense, but just simply talking in relation to the footballing side, I think Ridley will benefit with having a guy like with a guy like Mackay in the back line.
Yeah, obviously Ridley played roles to fix up and patch over problems in our defense just because he can, but it meant that he couldn't play the natural role. We've seen it with Sicily at times as well, and the Hawks is probably the most comparable player.
Yeah.
In the sense that he's been asked to do roles, play taller, whatever it may be, to fill that need. But when he's actually been able to be freed off the leash and play his natural kind of game, that's when we've seen he's best from a Supercoach perspective.
Yeah. And then we also picked up in the offseason during the draft some really exciting players, especially Nate Caddy at pick 10, who we traded up to get him. We had our eyes set on him from the get-go because we really need some more keys. We picked up Sam Wiedemann at the end of 2022, which didn't really work out, to be honest. So we've got Nate Caddy. who was our man, and he, by all reports, looks to be really exciting and could feature really early on in 2020, 2024.
Yeah, he is what they would call an undersized key forward. It didn't used to be that 193 centimeters and probably growing was undersized, but it is for this
Yeah.
day and age. But yeah, being able to play that third tall with that kind of athletic profile, to me, he kind of seems like someone that could be earmarked as a long-term replacement for Stringer, which would make
Yeah.
sense given that he's in a contract here. So wasn't necessarily someone that was expected to play year one. But from the early trading reports have been really positive. But Vossi's ringing in my ear from last year because Vossi also had really good training, played strong in the VFL earlier, and then didn't get a game and got delisted. So not that I'm suggesting it's what happens with Caddy, but I have a feeling that this will be a development year unless we do have injuries to, say, Jones, Stringer, these types that actually free it up. And, as you mentioned, we still got Wiedemann on the list as well. So
Exactly. We also picked up a couple of dashing half-backs. Obviously, we've got Nick Hind on the list, and we lost Massimo D'Ambrosio, who we like to use occasionally in that role. So I think it makes sense for us to sort of try and replenish and try and pick up a couple of exciting prospect players that can give us some dash. Lual, a bit more offensive as a player, whereas Archie Roberts tends to be a much more neater kick of the football coming off halfback. So I think for their selections, especially Archie Roberts, he was widely touted on the night to be one of the steals of the draft at pick 54. But of course, only time will tell. They're both development players, and I don't think either of them will feature this year.
yeah, I mean, I'm surprised if Archie is a development player because from what I've read, he's kind of like a Jake Lloyd in the sense that his athletic attributes don't necessarily stand out, but he's a very nice kick and he reads the play well for his size and all that type of stuff. So it's a little bit of an interesting one because if you don't see those types being ready to play now, then why did you draft them? Where someone like Lual is the more typical pick you see these days, which has got all that athleticism and upside, but maybe a little bit more raw and need the development. So yeah, I mean, both in the halfback, and I think you're right. It comes back to where we weak last year. We were very slow coming out of defense, and we weren't very good at it either at times. And if you think about the types of players that were traditionally exiting defense, Ridley, he's a good kick, but he's not necessarily quick. You've got Heppel, who the same criticism. He is not necessarily a great kick or quick or it's penetrating any of these things, especially now that he's got on an age. And Redman definitely has some excitement and dash and can kick it long. But just in terms of like that rebounding halfback, it's not like the days when we had Sard and
McKenna.
McKenna, exactly, bouncing off the back line. Hind is actually the closest that we have to it. And so I'm surprised that he wasn't used more. But with some of the drafting and recruiting, and then also with some of the preseason changes we've heard about, I feel like they are really trying to address the ability for us to have a more balanced attack out of defense and not just go into that slow play style that probably got us caught up at various points throughout the last year.
Yeah, we were our own biggest enemy many times during the season. We'd always have some sort of silly turnover in junk time and concede some goals right at the end of quarters. That was disgusting. And we also picked up a young rookie ruckman in the rookie draft with pick 8, Vigo Vicentini, a wonderful name. He is related to Dante Vicentini over there at Port Adelaide. And so it makes sense, again, to just keep, if we're going to have Nick Bryan eventually break into the AFL, we're going to need someone developing in the VFL behind him. So it just made sense to pick up Vigo there. Now,
hold on, just before we move on, just finishing off on the list stuff, I just want to ask, do you feel like there's still any glaring gaps in our list at the moment?
Glaring, look, I think we've got very solid forward. I think we've got a solid forward line in that it's a bit mobile. You don't need, I think Collingwood have shown that you don't necessarily need to have the stock standard forward line. If it can be sufficiently mobile with good smalls in particular, like a Bobby Hill and an Elliott, for example, and a Ginnivan. So if you can have sufficient smalls with a mobile key forward, then I think that works. And I think we've sort of got that in Jai Menzie. Hopefully we can get Tex Wanganeen healthy. Hopefully we can get the Davey boys healthy. So I think we've got ample smalls on the list, and we've got obviously Langford and Caddy, who's mobile. So I think we can, and Jones is mobile as well. So I think our forward line can replicate a Collingwood's forward line. I think the midfield, with more development into Hobbs, I think just having another big key mid would be great. Like a Bond size. If we just had one of those going through the midfield, I think we'd have a real good spine. Because I really rate Darcy Parish. Obviously, Zach Merritt's a gun. We've got some great young players going through, but we just don't have that size to help in the stoppage. So if we had picked up Dunkley a couple seasons ago, I reckon we'd be knocking on the door of top 4.
Okay, interesting. All right, cool.
You don't agree?
I haven't thought about it too much. I'm still a little bit worried about our smalls. Like, you think about how strong Collingwood is in there, and they invested even more picking up Schultz, who's one of the best in the business.
Yep.
Compare our smalls to theirs, I feel like we're a long way off. Maybe fast forward a few years when we've got development to some of these younger guys, it doesn't feel as far off anymore. But I guess it's a bit of a concern for me. And then a lot of the rest of it, we kind of have pieces in place or draft capital in place, but the development needs to come through. Like, we've got a fair bit in the forwards, but, like Jones and Caddy actually have to develop. Reed and Cox actually have to develop. We've picked up a fair few reasonably high midfield picks, whether it be Hobbs, Parish, Perkins, but once again, the development's got to come on. So I feel like, we've probably addressed all the list needs, but does it actually come through in development, and can it come together as a cohesive game plan, I guess, is probably more what I'm looking for this year.
And that might be the reason why Dodoro managed to last so long, because you can just look at it, and in terms of the talent, the caliber of the talent that he's picked up over the course of these years, especially in recent times, you can't say that these are necessarily, most of them are bad picks. You can say, you'd say objectively that a lot of the issue has come from the development side of things. And that's also one of the big off-field changes that we didn't discuss earlier in the video, that we've actually gone over the soft cap. We are investing a lot more into development coaches so that they can address these players to develop properly. And that was part of what was picked up in the external review, that our fitness was lacking, that our development is lacking. And I think we're doing everything we can to adjust those. Craig Vozzo, the new CEO, Dave Barham, another change, the new president. So we've had a lot of change. I think it takes maybe a little bit of time to see the change actually be implemented on the field. So what can we predict to see from our boys in 2024?
Is that a question for me?
No, it's a question for God. God, what are we going to see this year?
I don't know. I'm in a state of permanent negativity, I think, for outlook. So set those expectations real low, and then they outperform whatever that's set at. So look, I think just thinking out loud, the expectation would have to be to play finals. Now, I always worry about playing finals a little bit, because I would say the most likely outcome is we play a final and lose it, and just more relentless trolling will happen off the back of that, which, is what it is. But I guess it's a step in the right direction. So I kind of see that being the case. I would imagine that, cracking over that 50% win-loss mark, or at least that 50-50. So what's that, 12 wins, something like that would be the minimum that I'm aiming for. But once again, it comes back to, are those pieces developing in the right places? Because if we have another year where, like, say, Draper, Cox, Reed, Hobbs, Caldwell, Jones, these types are basically at the same point that have been the last 3 years, then we're going nowhere, because that is all our youth, that's all our high draft picks, and all of them have been injured. So for me, that's like the health of those guys, and actually seeing that core develop is what I am most hopeful for this year. And if that happens, I'll be happy. But if we have the same thing as last year, where all those types are injured, inconsistent, don't have roles, don't play games, and we finish 6th, I won't be that happy, because I don't think that's sustainable. You're going to get to a point where all this top end falls off, and none of the next level of our rebuilding side is actually there to build for the future. So I don't know if that really answers the question of prediction, but that's kind of where I'm at for the moment.
Look, I predict that our forward line will be better this year in 2024 than last year. So I think Gresham's going to be. I think not enough is being talked about Gresham, especially when you compare him as an upgrade to Snelling. Now, and there's no disrespect to Snelling, but he was a player that really tried all he could to kick the ball more than 30 meters, but he would struggle all the time. Like he just couldn't kick a goal.
He was good, like 3 years ago, and then he had injuries and he just never got back to it, which was a shame. So, I mean, I don't want to bag on Snelling, but I think,
No,
Gresham, compared to
I think
last year,
Gresham's a
Gresham
big
should be a
upgrade.
pretty obvious upgrade.
Yep.
The big standout from last year was obviously Langford's development as a forward. And this
Yes.
is part of the thing where it's like, it's hard to give Scott credit for this because they were desperate to play him as a defender until all the forward injuries. And then he ended up being our leading goal kicker for the year. I can't imagine he'll actually keep the same total with Wright and some of the other forwards back, but I'm interested to see how that plays out. And obviously, if you've got a healthy Wright, a healthy Stringer, contracting a Stringer, just a different animal. But I could see Langford, Wright, Stringer, Gresham, if they were all able to play consistent games this year, to be a very improved forward line on what we saw last year. I think part of the problem, though, was still leading patterns and inside 50 entries. So while having those right pieces in place will be important, it's still how the rest of the game plan comes together is going to determine that, and whether we're actually moving the ball forward fast enough that they can get the space to, take marks and actually open up the 50 themselves.
I think we're going to see quite quicker ball movement, just by virtue of the adding Dersma. I think Dersma will certainly help on a wing. Obviously, we've been reading up reports about Nick Martin perhaps playing off half back, having that sort of positional adjustment to take the game on a bit more. Maybe you might see more license for Nick Hine to run as well, which we didn't really see much of in 2023. So I think there's going to be an emphasis on quicker ball movement. I'm also more interested in seeing whether or not we can defend the ground better. I think that's been one of our biggest issues for many years under many different coaches. The last coach that finally managed to have us actually defend properly was when we had a whole bunch of All-Australians under James Hird all those years ago. I think I want to see us defend the ground a bit better. And from reports, I think they're really drilling down on that a lot more. So I anticipate that hopefully, because if we can defend better, it means we don't have to kick as many goals to win games. So I'm looking forward to seeing an improved defense, I think, this year. So especially we've got Mackay. So hopefully we don't get caught out by these big key forwards, which I think will go a long way, because a lot of times these big key forwards will kick like 7-8 goals on us. And it'll be pretty demoralizing, especially against Geelong. Freaking Geelong in Geelong is unwinnable for us. I think.
Yeah, probably. I don't know. Yeah, we've at least got a matchup for Hawkins this time, right? Although, Ridley did a good job on him, but he'd already filled his boots at that point. To be fair, I think our defense was improved last year, and given some of the injuries and restrictions, they actually did all right. But yeah, I mean, I think that could reasonably improve this year as well.
Yeah, I think there was definitely improvement in the defensive 50, but the problem was I think we allowed the ball to transition really well too easily into
defensive
our back
transition.
50.
Still a problem for sure. Yeah,
for sure. So hopefully we can see an improvement on that. And whilst we're talking about predictions, I've got a clear team here. We'll try and put together pretty quickly what we think our best 22 is going to be in the back line. I guess we'll start in defense. Probably going to be Ben Mackay, I would imagine, being the first key defender on off the bat.
Yep, I would throw him in there. You can throw Ridley, Redmond in there as well. McGrath, I think they're all safe starts.
McGrath's safe. Does Heppel start round 1, you reckon?
I do not have him in my best 23 or best 22. I think it's probably likely that he gets picked, but if I was picking the side, I'd leave him out. Where do you stand?
Yeah, I was so adamant on him getting dropped and sacked last year, but he turned it around. I don't mind having him coming off the bench for some extra leadership for me.
So this once again comes down to what's the game plan this year, because if we're trying to move faster out of defense, I agree that he's got leadership, but I think, Mackay is not a junior player anymore. Ridley and Redmond aren't. McGrath's a vice captain in the side as well. So how much more leadership do we need down back? Whereas someone like he can be a a player coach and start transitioning into that role and be on the bench and doing all that type of stuff. But the reality is we've already got a fair few senior players from Essendon's defence down there, and we are lacking speed and ability to exit. So if I was picking between him and Hind, I would have Hind at the moment. I'm not sure I'm starting either of them in my first 6. I think the ones that are missing so far that I'd probably place above both those is Reid, if he's fit and healthy, and probably Cox as well. I imagine that his best position is going to be in defence. The only thing I worry about with selecting all of Mackay, Ridley, Reid, and Cox is whether that's too tall as a defensive structure. But Cox is, agile and not necessarily a big body anyway. So maybe thinking of him as a tall is not the right frame. Ridley can play smaller as well. And I think Baldwin would be great. I think he's the one that if like Reid isn't up to it, Baldwin comes in.
Yeah, I think Baldwin is ahead of Cox, to be honest. I think Baldwin's ahead of Cox. I don't know. I'm still not sold on Cox personally. I think he hasn't shown enough at senior level for us. I think he's a real confidence type of player. We need him to, I think, play in the VFL, get some confidence, to get that mojo that he had in his first year back, I think. I think Baldwin is fighting for the same spot that Laverty's got.
We didn't even mention Laverty. I see Laverty as depth for Mackay now. I mean, I think he could play in that second tall if Reid or like over Reid or Baldwin. I think it's foreseeable that they do that. But if I was picking defenders, it would be Mackay, Ridley, Redmond, McGrath, Reid, Cox, and then Hind would be on my bench. If I'm picking around one side at the moment, obviously not being at training, not knowing the game plan, caveat. But that for me strikes the this comes back to what I was saying. What I want to see development out of these high draft picks, Reid and Cox, because if Cox isn't going to get there, if Reid isn't going to get there, they're what, year 4 now? This is about the year we're going to figure out that they're actually not cut out for it. We need to move on, and actually this is still a weakness for us. So
very true.
They're my round one side. We're not winning the premiership this year. They got to get games.
That's right. All right, midfield. It's got to be Zach. It's got to be DP3.
Yep.
Nick Martin. Do we want him on a wing, or do you want to see him play off halfback?
So I would have him on a wing spot, mainly because I think he's just going to come back and play defense. Like I've got him kind of earmarked as halfback, playing as like a 7th defender, pushing up behind the stoppage, that type of thing. So thinking Dacos, Doherty, Sinclair type role from last year, where it's 40% CBA, some wing time, some defense. So he'd be in that center mix, but I would name him on a wing probably rather than as starting on the ball. And so along with Merritt and Parrish, I'd probably name Hobbs over some of the others, such as Sardis and Caldwell, as the third in that rotation.
Agreed.
And then, I don't think he's getting a game this year. I think he's just depth. I know he's the bigger body, but once again, I feel like we've got to develop Hobbs, Caldwell, Sardis over playing Setterfield, as much as he did add something last year. And we still didn't even talk about Shield, who's got to come back at some point as well. By the way, this is the curse of Essendon. We seem to have a lot of these like B+ players, and we just don't have enough of the AA+, which is, if we could trade in 2 or 3 of these guys for another star, it just would be amazing, but we have never done it. All right.
Dersma,
so Dersma's the other wing. So between Martin, Dersma, and then I would add Durham onto my bench eventually. They're the 3 wings for us, with Sardis also being probably a bench in my best 22, and he's potentially also someone that could play on the outside throughout the game, or Cox could be the other one. So I kind of like that Cox-Martin thing because they could rotate half-back, wing, that type of thing as well. And then
Caldwell in there. I think Colders will sort of be playing mid-forward a bit, I would imagine.
Yeah, he could be playing half forward. I think when I did a best 22 last, he ended up as my sub. But for some reason, I just don't see them doing that with him. He's not really suited to it. It's not like a Hind or someone like that, which is probably better suited to it. But that's probably where I'd have him.
Agreed.
Yeah.
All right, we get to the rucks. It's probably going to be Goldie. We picked him for a reason. And then Draper would obviously be our best option. Obviously, Nick Bryan will not be playing if we've got these 2.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's interesting is if they're both fit, do they both play, or do we just play one? So I
It is.
assumed we were moving towards just playing one tall ruck this year if Wright and others were fit and healthy. But yeah, I don't know. What do you think is going to happen?
I agree. I think we're going to move to the one ruck setup, even though Brad Scott showed that he did like the two ruck setup a lot of the time last year. I think though a lot of it has got to do because Draper went down and Nick Bryan's probably not ready to be a sole ruck by himself. So we had to play the two rucks, and as a
Mhm.
result, we was too slow and we were caught out a lot because Phillips ain't fast and Brian ain't fast either. So
Well,
I
part
think
of playing the two rucks was also to cover up the injuries in the forward line as well, because we just weren't
correct.
tall enough down there. But none of our rucks are really suited to playing forward. So yeah, it's just a bit of a disaster.
But Goldie can. Goldie can play forward. He can take a
A
mark.
little bit. And Draper can play a little bit, but they're not. Yeah, yeah. I still think Wright is basically perfect for that role because he
Yeah,
can pinch hit, but he is a genuine forward.
absolutely. We get the forward line. I think Peter Wright is going to, to me, Peter is our first named up there with Langford. I think
Yep.
these two are our two
Walk up
supposed
selections.
spearheads. Yeah, absolutely. Who the third would be Jake Stringer if he's fit.
If he's fit, and then the newness in Gresham would make
Yep.
4. I think they're probably the first 4 picked. Interesting to hear where you go after this point, because we're really missing, I guess, a couple of smalls, some half forwards, and maybe another tall. So where are you at?
I think we need to play Archie Perkins.
Yep, he'd be the
Again,
half forward I had in mind.
yep, it's got to be Perkins and it's got to be Jai Menzies. We need a
Menzies would
small,
be, yep.
need a genuine goal sneak who can sniff out a goal. So I think they are the ones. I'd love Harry Jones to play as a
Yep.
half. I think he plays as a high half forward at his best.
Yep.
I don't think he's the key. Love to see Harry Jones in that
Yeah.
sort of
So
position.
the side that I'd selected had Harry Jones, and we weren't playing two rucks. So you have a
Right.
slightly taller group with Wright, Langford, Jones. Just because if you've got the ruck coming off and then Wright pushing up, then the other ruck, like you still have a tall enough forward line. So yeah, that's kind of where I had it.
Yep.
But yeah, that leaves out Caddy, and I know some people were hoping for him as a super coach pick early on. I think he could come in, but he feels like a natural replacement if Jones, Stringer,
Yep.
Langford are injured. I could see him coming in and reasonably replacing any of those if he had good form. The
Absolutely.
other one that
Okay.
would have been great to see is Hunter, but he's of course done his ACL, which is really unfortunate. Mid-season draft last year, killing it in the VFL, injured, and then started this year ACL, so he's out for the year as well. I wonder if he actually gets another shot at the AFL level, which is a bit sad if he doesn't. And we were talking about Voss, but some people have wondered whether or not he could be a train on for us to get a replacement for him. He's training with, I want to say, Freo at the moment, so he may still get a list spot. But
yeah, I don't know. Jen Hunter only had a 1-year deal. Sort of extended him whilst injured because we saw the potential and he was showing it in preseason. It genuinely sucks. I don't know. I'd like us to persist because I think he showed quite a bit in preseason that he was able to develop. And we've got someone like Baldwin in the back line who is also coming off 2 ACLs himself. So it's not like you're doomed to not be able to perform. Hopefully, our forward line is able to carry the load and actually perform whilst he can come back from injury and sort of complement because Stringer's not got long to go. Even if he gets a contract renewal, I think we'll be going on a year-by-year basis at this point, I think.
Yep.
Yeah, so that is our list there. Let us know in the comments down below, guys, if you agree with what JD and I have said. If we've disrespected Laverty, please don't hit us and don't hate us for it. We love him very much, as well as any player that we didn't include. We're looking at not winning the flag this year. We're looking at trying to get as much development as we can into these really high talented players that we've got. It's what we're building our list around. And did you know that we have the most number of top 10 draft picks out of every other team in the comp?
I did. I believe it's like 12 or something like that.
Correct.
But it's somewhat deceptive because some of these have been like picked up off the scrap heap. Like I think Wright falls into that bucket, for example, right?
He is, yes.
Right. Yeah. But there's a few like that where it's like, yeah, we've got a lot of these top 10. Oh, Wiedemann was another one, I believe. That So yeah, like we got these. Yeah, but like they're recycled top 10 picks from other clubs, not necessarily true top 10 draft capital. And a lot of our own, outside of obviously McGrath, but players like Cox, Reed, Caddy, they're all like 9, 10 draft picks. It's not like they're top 5 or top 3, which really seems to be where some of those elite players come from.
Correct.
Yeah, I digress.
And with that, guys, it was our discussion here on the Essendon Bombers. We were joined by an absolute legend of the AFL community, not just Supercoach. It is, of course, JD. Thank you so much for coming on, my friend. It was an absolute pleasure talking. I hope you had a good time.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for having me. Hopefully we get to have the same conversation next year with a lot more optimism and positivity after finally seeing some results on the year in 2024. But until then, I'll go back to being a sullen, downtrodden Essendon supporter with just that glimmer of hope in my eye.
Absolutely. And where can, for all the people living under a rock here on the channel, where can they find you?
Well, the rock lovers may just want to stay there, to be honest. Like, I'm just saying, if you've enjoyed the rock so far, like, why try something new? Just stay where we are. But if you are interested in venturing out, you can find me on YouTube by just searching my name, Jackson Davey, or at Jackson Davey, on Twitter as well. I tweet about different stuff. And then, YouTube is obviously for Supercoach and a little bit of fantasy content in the preseason. And then finally, as you mentioned, I'm part of Fantasy Take TV, which is run out of Supercoach George's channel, or you can search Fantasy Take TV on Spotify, iTunes, and wherever else podcasts can be found to enjoy the dulcet tones of JD, Eno, and George on a weekly basis.
And once you get there, you'll be very quickly joining their Discord, where you will see JD being a father to many immature young children.
Yeah, unfortunately, haven't done a good job raising them, so just got to focus on the 2 at home, and good luck to everyone else.
Thank you so much for coming on, guys. If you like what you saw here today, please drop us a like, a subscription. If you're new, hit that notification bell to make sure that you don't miss out on any of the content that we are pumping out. And head on over to Jackson Davey's channel, as well as Fantasy Take TV. It's been your boy Joe with JD. We'll see you all in the next one. Bye for now.
Peace.